Russians are not having a very good time in Kherson Oblast. Ukrainians achieved a major breakthrough following the Dnipro River. They are now flanking significant Russian forces in there. Moreover, in the Luhansk area, right now, Ukrainians are advancing to the second defense line from Svatovo to Kreminna, which is going to be very hard for the Russians to hold. And they're actually pulling out their regular troops already. What will the mobilization troops bring to the table right now and in the coming months in the conflict? We're going to talk this and more in today's episode. So let us start. So let us jump to this deep state map that we have right here. So we knew for a while now Ukraine was looking on how to deal with the Russian forces in this part of the area. The first plan was that they were able to advance further and then essentially cut this part out from the Russian control and encircle and make sure that they get surrendered. But not everything worked out to the plan because the concentration of the Russian forces in this area is quite large. But Ukrainians continued with the attrition warfare, and we were not expecting any kind of major breakthrough. But we got pleasantly surprised yesterday when we got notification that Khreshenivka, Shevchenkivka, and Zolota Balka have been liberated. This came as a big surprise, as this is a significant achievement in the Kherson Oblast. And while I usually don't cover the situation change when it's like a single village has been taken or liberated, because a village going here or there doesn't really matter. What matters is if the situation changes importantly. And it indeed happened, because after that we got notification that Ukrainians are actually advancing further down the road to Duchane. And Duchane is actually quite an important part of the settlement. As it later turned out, the front line moved approximately to this area here, and this breakthrough in one day was about 10 to 12 kilometers deep. Right now, as far as I'm aware, there is fighting in Duchane and around it, so the city is still in a gray zone. But what this makes essentially is now that Ukrainian forces advancing so deep, they are having some of the Russian flanks exposed. So from now on, Ukrainians can actually go and attack the Russian forces from the side. This can easily collapse the Russian groupings around here. Already yesterday, we saw with a lot of panic, and Ukrainians used it to secure Arkhangelsk. So now the control over Arkhangelsk. What we should expect right now is maybe Russians would consider if they should maybe retreat from some of these forward areas because they do not have really good connections. Additionally, we have news that the attack towards Davidov Brid is happening and towards Chkalove. So Ukrainians are continuing to put pressure on the Russians and maybe see if they will break. So we'll see how the situation will develop, but this is a major change in this area. And if the situation develops favorably for Ukrainians, obviously the target that they would like to get is towards the Novokakhovka. But in between, the city that we should be aware of is Berislav. That is kind of the gateway to Novokakhovka. That is Kherson area. So extremely good news, very significant knowing how big the concentration of forces are in Kherson area. But more importantly, Ukrainians are continuing their advance on the eastern flank. So we talked a little bit last time about Borova, and that Ukrainians most probably will not attack Borova and they will instead kind of try to flank. And that's exactly what happened. We got news today that Ukrainian forces essentially entered Borova with some proofs that there is video proofs that Ukrainians entered villages just to the east of Borova. Most likely that Russian troops understood what was happening and they decided to pull out. So Ukrainians just took over this part of the land with little to no fighting, which is obviously great. So fighting is still continuing with Ukrainians trying to advance. Most probably this was the forces that were defending the line, so the Russian forces can retreat from Borova direction. But slowly but surely, Ukrainians are getting to this second defensive line from Svatove to Kreminna and so on. So far, we know that Ukrainians are already taking over this part of the area that was previously controlled by the Russians, and they are preparing the siege of Kreminna. We should expect that the roads should be cut from both sides. We already have seen reports that Ukrainians are advancing in the direction of Lysychansk, essentially somewhere here. And we're going to be looking where the Ukrainians will cut this road, which is towards the southeast of Kreminna, which is here. And then, more importantly, there is already reports from the Russian troop that this road is not under full control. Ukrainian forward spearhead troops that are light cavalry, so I call them, they're driving on their Humvees with machine guns, are already having some control over this road. So this road is not safe for Russians. More importantly, this line is not going to be as defensible for the Russians as it was around Liman, because Liman was a very narrow bottleneck where Russians could concentrate a lot of the force. It is not the same here. There is quite a lot of options for Ukrainians open on how they want to approach Svatove or Kreminna. So they can go around, they can move forward, just passing it and then sieging it with main force. There are options for Ukraine. So we should not expect that Russians will be able to hold this line quite as strongly as they held towards Liman. So that means that the tempo that Ukrainians are having is extremely high. They are advancing forward, and we can expect the battle for Svatove to come very, very soon. Moreover, we have reports from Kreminna that the regular Russian forces are being pulled out. And the best explanation for it that I've heard that I think makes sense is that Russian command is hoping to preserve as much as possible competent and battle-ready forces, like from the regular Russian army. I'm thinking that they either want to save that army to essentially to defend Russia once this war is over. That was one explanation. And the second explanation was that maybe they are trying to wait until the mobilized reserves come in a significant numbers, and then use essentially the regular army troops to be essentially the backbone of the army, and then add the mobilized troops as the meat to it. So right now, Crimea will be defended mostly by volunteers and some semi-mobilized forces. So it's not going to be a regular army defense. So Russia is continuing to kind of delay Ukraine rather than actually putting efforts to stop it in the Luhansk area. This is not very good for the Russian campaign in strategic sense, because Liman was a big hit for the Russian morale. But I will talk about this in the second part of the video. And as always, I want to start the second part of the video by saying thanks to everyone that is watching this channel. You are making a great, important contribution to the Ukrainian forces, as I'm running this channel non-profit, and at least 50% of whatever I earn will go to support Ukrainian army. Additionally, you see people scrolling down here. Those are the members and the patrons of this channel, and their donations are really helping this channel to get better, and then also help Ukrainian army. So Russian command is definitely saving forces to see what's going to come next, at least the regular Russian army and not the mobilized or the volunteer brigades that they're having. And this is interesting because either they are saving the forces, as I said, to essentially be prepared to what comes after the war, because Russia needs to be defended, or they're more likely preparing to be a backbone for the mobilized forces. Whatever it is, the problem is that we might not get to that situation. Now, mobilization has brought a lot of variables on the table. So right now, it's very hard to tell when this war will end, and mostly because it is not completely clear how efficient the mobilized will be, right? There is a lot of questions around what will Russians going to be doing with the mobilized, because right now they are sending them with little to no training to the battle lines, and these forces are getting mowed down. But we also know that some parts of the mobilized are being trained, more notably around the proxies that Russia is having around Luhansk and Donetsk. That means that some part of those Russian forces will get trained. Additionally, the question still stands on how many actual people Russia can mobilize. Will it be 300? Will it be 1 million? Can they go over it? Because as the mobilization will continue and the Russian families will start receiving notifications that their kids and fathers and other men of draft age gonna get killed, will that change in the situation inside of Russia? We don't know, right? It's an unknown. I know there's a lot of people in the West that really want that to happen, that this situation in Russia changes, but it might as well not be. They might just completely agree with Putin and just say we cannot do anything, therefore we're just going to send our sons and fathers to die, and so be it. And then after they've been taken, then the Russian military suddenly becomes very excellent and adapts and trains them to the highest possible standards. And it finds some kind of hidden facilities where they had a whole stockpile of the T-90 tanks with super modern artillery, and suddenly these troops becomes basically the elite of the Russian force, and Russia has 100,000 or like a million more elite forces. Two very different scenarios. I know, like both of them probably not very factual, but you get the idea. There is a lot of variability in what the mobilization can bring to the table, and so far we don't see that it's producing that much value for the Russians. So far it's training the Russian system, especially because they decided not to cancel the conscription part. If you don't know about the Russian conscription, go watch the video about why the Russian army is shit. I explained it there. And we need to understand that this brings a lot of the problems for the Russian system. It will take time for it to adjust. I would give, like knowing how Ukrainian system adjusted, maybe 3 to 4 months at least for the system to kind of understand how things work and work out systematic approach to this. In these 3 4 months, Ukraine will have some kind of advantage, and then the mobilized obviously will start flowing into the country, and depending on their battle capabilities, either they will be liability, as I explained. A possible liability would be that Russians will just use them to man the defenses, and then Ukrainians will see where it is just immobilized with, for example, super weak morale, like for example drafted from the opposition parties, which is that's a very weird way to go about your opposition in Russia, because then they're gonna send and they will just run whenever the Ukrainians will come, and that would mean that those openings will be exploited by the Ukrainian army. And at that moment, it will be even a question: should they be on the front lines at all, or they will be used in a very significant grouping with the Russian core army that they're having. And for example, Russia will be okay giving away the Luhansk region, and then they will shorten the battle lines, and they will have the density big enough so there are no major breaches. And then the mobilized will just slowly but surely learn about the military arts and become a battle-capable force. And then we go into quite a lengthy standstill until Ukraine starts grinding them down, until Russia runs out of men, basically. Well, that's the worst-case scenario. We'll see. There is a lot of variability. We should definitely see that in the coming months or so, Ukraine should press the advantage, and they can press it quite hard. And we can see that it's already being pressuring the Russian society. There is a lot of arguments in the Russian society in between just by the loss of Liman. And we know that Svatove and Starobilsk are pretty much on the table. They're coming. Kherson right now is becoming a real threat. If Russia in the coming couple of months loses Kherson, it loses the whole northern part of Luhansk region. That is quite a big hit to the Russian morale. And we'll see if that will influence the command. Moreover, interesting to talk about is that what Ukrainians did in the Kherson region. Apparently, they used some kind of weapons or some kind of electronic warfare systems that were able to jam Russian communications. I believe that this has to do with Ukrainians capturing some very rare equipment of the Russian communication equipment around Izum area, and this might brought them some results. So that it's interesting that Ukraine is getting some kind of new equipment and battle capabilities, and this is what kind of equipment Ukraine should get. People ask me on the stream, and if you haven't watched the stream, there's the answer. People ask me on the stream whether or not Ukraine should get any kind of new special weapons, and I said, I think Ukraine is getting pretty good weapons, it's just they need more of it. But if the weapon is just allowing for a whole new layer of battle capability, that's great. And if we're talking mobilized in Russia and what are they bringing to the table, we need to understand that they're not bringing any kind of new battle capability, such as like a good command structure or ability to have secured comms. A lot of times their inexperience will actually be sabotaging more experienced Russian troops. We saw that even early on, like when the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic warriors that were fighting for 8 years saw the Russian columns of like vehicles just coming in, and they're saying, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Like, you're just going to get completely sniped by the long-range artillery if you just continue driving in columns around these parts. So it's interesting, and we're going to see what's going to happen. But that's going to sum it up for today's update. This week, I'm going to have a vacation week, so that means I'm going to make more videos. It's a vacation from my main job rather than from YouTube, so I'll be able actually to dedicate myself more. There should be additional stream this week, and I'm planning to release even more videos talking about the situation in Ukraine. Stay safe, support Ukraine. See you next time.